His question, "Who did this to you?" hung in the air, becoming the dividing line between the two stories of my life. The previous part of the story, the one where I was a silent, broken omega, ended the moment my trembling finger touched his hand and tamed the storm in his soul. I survived where I was meant to die, and that became the end of my old life. Now the continuation began, the story of what happens to an anchor when the storm subsides. His protection had become my new cage, and the hatred of the pack and a humiliated Kyle was a shadow at my heels. He waited for an answer, a name for his rage, but my silence was an old, deep wound, and I didn't know how to tear it open. The word was a brand sizzling against the cold morning air. Queen, it settled over my shoulders like a mantle woven from iron and starlight, a weight I was not built to bear. The scar on my neck, the ghost of Kale's claws, pulsed with a phantom ache, a stark reminder of the omega I had been. Only days ago, in the stunned silence of the courtyard, surrounded by hundreds of watching eyes, I was a fraud dressed in a king's proclamation. My hand held fast in his. Rael led me away from the courtyard, away from the scent of blood and rain-soaked earth. His grip was a manacle of purpose, pulling me through the throng of his pack. Their scents were a chaotic storm of emotions, the raw, primal awe of the warriors, the sharp, jealous resentment from the court's higher-ranking females, and from the elders, a cold, calculating stillness that was more menacing than any open hostility. They were no longer merely afraid. They were assessing a new piece on the board, a silent pawn that had been unexpectedly promoted. Back within the stone fortress of his chambers, the heavy ironwood door thudding shut behind us. The silence was a roaring vacuum. Rael finally released my hand, and the loss of contact left me adrift, my skin cold where his had been. He moved to the hearth, his back to me, the tension in his shoulders betraying the calm authority he had projected in the yard. He had thrown down a gauntlet, and now he had to face the consequences. I felt a desperate need to retreat, to shrink back into the ghost I had been. This was too much. The title, the power, the weight of his world pressing in on me. I took a step back toward the door, my breath catching in my throat. I was not a queen. I was a cage for his storm, a lens for his visions. A tool, beautiful perhaps, useful certainly, but a tool nonetheless. He turned, sensing my retreat as surely as if I had screamed it. His storm-gray eyes pinned me in place. "Do not," he said, his voice a low command. "Do not run from this." I shook my head, my hands twisting in front of me. I gestured to myself, to my simple tunic, my scarred skin, my silent mouth. My whole being was a protest against the title he had given me. "I know what you are," he said, stalking towards me, his presence shrinking the vast room until it was only the two of us and the crackling fire. "You think you are broken. You think you are the stray Kyle named you. You are wrong." He stopped a breath away, forcing me to meet his intense gaze. Broken things do not have the strength to hold back a storm like mine. Broken things do not have the clarity to see through the fog of war and guide a king's hand. What was done to you was a crime, an attempt to shatter something precious. They failed. He reached out, not to take my hand, but to gently cup my jaw. His thumb brushed over my cheek, a gesture of profound tenderness that felt utterly at odds with the warrior who had snapped a man's neck an hour before. "I named you queen for them," he whispered, his voice a rough caress, "so they would understand your place, so they would know that to challenge you is to challenge me, so they would afford you the power and protection the title demands." His eyes darkened, a raw vulnerability seeping through his iron control. "But I also named you queen for me, because when my wolf looks at you, it is the only word he knows." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird beating against a cage. My own wolf, still so weak, so timid, whimpered in response. It felt the truth in his words, the deep, primal recognition that bypassed all logic, all reason, all the scars that told me I was unworthy. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Rael's expression hardened, the king returning to replace the man. Enter. Vorlog stepped inside, his arm now bound in a clean sling, his face etched with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp, his loyalty a tangible force in the room. He bowed his head to Rael, then his gaze flickered to me, and for the first time, I saw not suspicion, but a grudging, hard-won respect. He had felt the sting of a silver arrow. He knew my vision had saved his life. The council is demanding an emergency session, my king, Vorlog reported, his voice a low rumble. Lycor and Gressa are incensed. They say you have overturned 1,000 years of tradition. That to name a queen, without the rights, without the council's approval, is an act of tyranny. Let them be incensed, Rael growled. Their traditions gave me 20 years of agony. My tyranny saved your life this morning. They are not the only ones whispering, Vorlog continued, his expression grim. Kale has been spreading poison. He tells anyone who will listen that you are bespelled, that the wolfless witch has clouded your mind. He invokes the old laws, claiming you have stolen his property. A wave of pure black rage washed off Rael, so potent I could feel it as a physical heat. The curse, ever present, stirred in its sleep, and the air in the room grew thin and sharp. I instinctively reached out and laid my hand on his arm. The rage did not vanish, but the silver fire receded before it could take hold. He looked down at my hand, then back at Vorlog, his jaw tight. Kael is a snake I should have crushed long ago, Tal. Rael snarled. Where is he? Confined to his quarters under guard, but Lycor has already been to see him. They are allies in this, sire. They will move to undermine her position, to prove her a fraud. They will fail, Rael stated, his voice flat and deadly. He looked at me, a new cold resolve in his eyes. We will not wait for them to strike. We will solidify your position. We will root out the traitors who brought the silver spears to our door. His gaze shifted back to Vorlog. Take me to the prisoners. Vorlog hesitated. The dungeons are no place for... He glanced at me again, his sentence trailing off. She will come with me, Rael commanded. Her eyes see things mine cannot. And the pack must see that she is not afraid. They must see that the Queen of the Iron Keep does not hide in the shadows. The dungeons were a descent into cold, damp darkness. The air was thick with the smells of stale water, despair, and old blood. The torches on the walls sputtered, casting long, monstrous shadows that danced like specters. The prisoners were held in separate cells, their fanatical defiance having bled away into sullen, terrified silence. They flinched back as Rael approached, his presence an overwhelming force in the cramped space. He was the monster from their legends, made flesh. He stopped before the cell of the hunter, who had been the leader's second in command, a man with cold, dead eyes and a cruel slash of a mouth. Rael stared at him, his silence more intimidating than any threat. I stood just behind him, my hand resting on the small of his back, a silent declaration of our unity. I could feel the hunter's hatred aimed at me like a physical blow. Who sent you? Rael asked, his voice deceptively calm. The hunter sneered, a flash of his earlier defiance returning. We serve a higher purpose, the cleansing of abominations. There are few silver spears left in this world, Rael countered, his voice like stones grinding together. You do not have the resources for an operation of this scale. The silver, the intelligence on our patrols, someone funded you, someone guided you. Give me a name. The hunter laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Why would I tell you anything, beast? So you can live another day under the sway of your little pet. His cold eyes locked onto me, filled with a venomous certainty. She cannot save you. The one who sent us knows the truth of this place, knows the old blood that runs beneath this mountain. His smile widened, a rictus of malice. He knows the price of silence. A chill entirely separate from the dungeon's cold snaked down my spine. The price of silence. My silence. He was talking about me. Rael went utterly still. The connection between us flared, and I felt the precise moment his thoughts sharpened into a deadly point. This wasn't a random taunt. It was a message. This enemy, this secret patron of the hunters, knew who I was, not just the king's anchor, but Milas Darren, the silent, rejected Omega. The number of people who knew the true depth of my shame, of Kyle specific cruelties, was terrifyingly small. "What price?" Rael demanded, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. The hunter leaned against the bars of his cell, his confidence growing as he saw the flicker of uncertainty he had ignited. "Ask your witch. Ask her what was taken from her 5 years ago, not just her mark, not just her voice." He licked his dry lips, his eyes gleaming. "Ask her what happens when a wolf is severed from its soul. You think her touch is a cure? It is the slow poison that will unravel you both. The moon demands balance. A soul for a soul, she is an empty vessel, and your power is pouring into a void. Soon there will be nothing left of either of you." His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. A void, an empty vessel. For 5 years I had felt hollowed out, as if Kyle's rejection had carved something vital from my core. I had thought it was just the pain of a broken bond, the shame of being wolfless. But what if it was more? What if this hunter, this fanatic, was speaking a terrible truth? Before Rael could react, before he could rip the information from the man's throat, I felt it. A new vision tearing into me without warning. No fog, no forest, just a flash of searing pain and a single crystal-clear image. Kale, standing before a shrouded figure in the dead of night, his hand outstretched. And in his palm, glinting in the moonlight, was a shard of obsidian. It was chipped, broken off a larger piece, but I recognized it instantly. It was a perfect match for the pendant hanging around my neck. The vision slammed into me, a physical impact that stole the air from my lungs and buckled my knees. The cold, damp stone of the dungeon floor rushed up to meet me, but I never hit it. Rael caught me, his arm a band of iron around my waist, holding me up as the world spun back into focus. The hunter's malevolent, triumphant face swam before my eyes, his words echoing in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. An empty vessel. A soul for a soul. Rael's grip was the only real thing in a world that had just been torn apart. He didn't ask what I had seen. He didn't have to. Through the frantic, chaotic current of our bond, he felt the echo of it. The image of Kyle, the glint of obsidian, the chilling certainty of betrayal. His body went rigid, not with the explosive heat of the curse, but with a cold, terrifying stillness that was far more dangerous. It was the absolute calm at the center of a hurricane, the moment before the world is ripped from its foundations. He straightened, pulling me with him until I was standing, trembling, on my own feet. He never took his eyes off the hunter in the cell. The man's sneering confidence faltered, replaced by a flicker of primal fear as he saw the look on the king's face. He had intended to plant a seed of doubt, of discord. Instead, he had just signed his own death warrant and that of the man he served. "Vorlag," Rael said, his voice a low, deadly rumble that vibrated through the stone. "Take this filth to the interrogation chamber. I want the name of the shrouded man. I want to know everything Kyle told him. Use whatever means are necessary." He looked at the hunter, his gray eyes promising an agony far beyond a swift death. "Keep him alive until I get there. His suffering has only just begun." Vorlag nodded, his one good arm gesturing to the guards. "Take him." As the hunter was dragged away, screaming threats and curses that sounded hollow even to his own ears, Rael turned to me. He cupped my face in his hands, his gaze searching mine, ignoring the guards and his beta, who were still present. He felt my terror, my confusion, the insidious poison of the hunter's words seeping into the cracks of my soul. "Do not listen to him," he commanded, his voice fierce, for me alone. "He speaks with a serpent's tongue. You are not empty. You are the fullest thing in my world." He pressed a hard, swift kiss to my forehead, a brand of ownership and a vow of protection. "Now we go see the snake in his den." We swept through the keep, a storm of royal fury. Word of our purpose seemed to travel ahead of us on whispers of dread. We did not go alone. 4 of the Iron Guard, massive, silent shifters in dark leather and steel, fell in step behind us. They were not an honor guard. They were an execution squad in waiting. Kael's quarters were in the upper levels of the keep, among the chambers of the other high-ranking warriors. They were opulent, far more so than I remembered, decorated with the pelts of his greatest kills and the silver hilts of ceremonial blades. He was pacing when we entered, the 2 guards stationed at his door, stepping hastily aside for their king. Elder Lycor was with him, seated in a high-backed chair, his wiry frame radiating disapproval. They had clearly been plotting, preparing their defense. They both froze as we entered. Kael's face, still bruised from Reikel's blow, paled. Lycor rose slowly to his feet, his expression hardening into a mask of defiance. "Your Majesty," Lycor began, his voice thin and reedy, "this is an outrage. To confine a warrior of Lord Kael's standing based on the ravings of an unstable female." Rael ignored him completely. His attention was fixed on Kael, a predator's unwavering focus. "You met with a man, shrouded, in the woods," Rael stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You gave him a shard of obsidian." It was not a question, it was a judgment. Kael's carefully constructed composure shattered. For a split second, pure, unadulterated panic flashed in his eyes. He had been seen. He had been caught. But then his cunning reasserted itself. He drew himself up, a sneer twisting his bruised lips. "I have no idea what you are talking about," he spat, his gaze flicking to me with pure hatred. "More tricks from your pet witch? What visions has she poisoned your mind with now?" "I saw you," I wanted to scream, the words a frantic, silent clawing at the back of my throat. I stood beside Rael, my fists clenched at my sides, a helpless, mute witness. "My visions have kept this keep from falling," Rael said, his voice dangerously soft. He took a step forward. Kael instinctively took a step back. "They unmasked a trap that would have cost me my beta. They identified our enemies, and now they have identified our traitor." "Traitor?" Kael scoffed, his bravado a thin cloak over his fear. He gestured wildly at me. "She is the traitor. Can none of you see it? Since she touched you, our king has become a different man. He ignores his counsel, he overturns tradition, he threatens his most loyal warriors. She is a cancer, a parasite draining the life from our pack, and she has bewitched him into naming her queen." He turned his appeal to Lycor. "Tell him, my lord, tell him this is madness." "The king's actions are irregular," Lycor said, choosing his words with care. "This Omega's sudden rise has sown chaos. Perhaps a neutral shaman should examine her to ascertain the true nature of her influence." It was a clever political move, to question me, to put my power on trial. But Rael was not playing their game. "There will be no examination," Rael snarled. He took another step, backing Kael against a large table laden with hunting trophies. "There will only be a confession." He reached out and grabbed the front of Kael's tunic, lifting him onto his toes. "The obsidian shard. Where did you get it?" Kael choked, his hand scrabbling at Rael's wrist. I don't know." A sudden fierce instinct seized me. The pendant, the vision, the hunter's words. It was all connected. I moved forward, my eyes scanning the room, not with sight, but with a deeper sense, a pull towards a specific spot. The hunter knew of my past, of my silence. Kael had told him. He had told him everything. My gaze locked onto a heavy, iron-bound chest at the foot of Kael's bed. It was his trophy chest, where he kept mementos of his life before my rejection had soured his reputation. Old memories, old secrets. I touched Rael's arm. He looked down at me, saw the certainty in my eyes, and followed my gaze to the chest. He understood. He shoved Kael towards the iron guard. "Hold him." While 2 of the guards pinned Kael, Rael strode to the chest. It was locked. Without a moment's hesitation, he gripped the lid and tore it from its hinges with a scream of protesting metal and splintering wood. Kael let out a strangled cry of rage and despair. "No, those are private!" Rael ignored him, tossing aside furs and old keepsakes, and then he stopped. He reached into the chest and pulled out a small, rotting leather pouch. The moment his fingers touched it, I felt a wave of cold, dark energy through our bond, a malevolent echo of whatever was inside. He untied the leather cord and tipped the contents into his palm. The shard of obsidian lay there, dark and sharp-edged, a perfect missing piece from the circle of my pendant. But it was not alone. Beside it lay another object, something that made my blood run cold. It was a small, crudely carved wooden wolf. Its throat slit, a single drop of dried blood like a ruby in the gash, and wrapped around its neck, so small I almost didn't recognize it, was a strand of silver thread, knotted and twisted into the shape of a cage. A shaman's totem, a curse. Not of rage like Rael's, but of binding, a curse of silence. The hunter's words came back to me. Ask her what was taken from her 5 years ago. Not just her mark, not just her voice. Ask her what happens when a wolf is severed from its soul. It hadn't just been the trauma of Kael's rejection that had stolen my voice and silenced my wolf. It had been this dark, deliberate magic. He hadn't just broken our bond. He had cursed me. He had caged my soul. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my throat. A wave of nausea and a grief so profound it felt like dying washed over me. 5 years. 5 years I had lived in a prison I never knew existed, blaming myself, believing I was broken, wolfless, less than nothing, all because of his petty, cruel jealousy. Rakel's face was a mask of thunder. He turned slowly, the totem and the shard resting in his palm, like a death sentence. He held it out for Lycor to see. "Is this also the work of a witch's vision, Elder? Or is it the work of a traitor who consorts with blood mages and assassins?" Lycor stared at the totem, his face pale, his political maneuvering crumbling into dust. He knew what it was. Every shifter did. It was forbidden magic, the kind that got shifters exiled or executed. He looked from the totem to Kael, his eyes filled with a dawning horror and disgust. He had backed the wrong wolf. Kael saw his last ally turn from him. He sagged in the guard's grip, his face a mess of terror and desperation. "I had to," he finally screamed, the truth tearing out of him in a ragged confession. She was different. Even then, her wolf was too strong, too wild for an Omega. It wouldn't submit to me. I was supposed to be the alpha. I had to tame her. The shaman said it would only bind her to me, make her compliant. "What shaman?" Rael's voice was like the cracking of a glacier. "I don't know his name," Kael sobbed. "He found me, said he knew of my problem. He gave me the totem. He told me how to perform the rite on the night I took her mark." His eyes found mine, pleading, insane. "It was for us, Malis, to make you the perfect mate, but it went wrong. It took your voice, your wolf. It broke you, and then you were useless to me, a broken, silent thing." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This shrouded shaman, the one who had given Kael the curse, was the same man leading the silver spears. He hadn't found Kael by chance. He had targeted him. He had known about my potential, the strange strength of my wolf, long before anyone else. He had used Kael's jealousy to neutralize me, to cage the very power that could have one day anchored the king. He had been playing a long, patient game, and we were only just beginning to understand the rules. "And the shard?" Rael prompted, his voice merciless. "He came to me a week ago," Kael whispered, his head bowed in defeat. "He said the king had found a new pet. He said your witch wore a pendant of power. He told me the shard was the key to tracking her, to understanding her magic. He promised me that when the king was dead, he would help me claim what was mine. He would make me a lord. He promised me you." Kael looked at me, his expression twisted with a sick, possessive longing. "As my prize." The air left my lungs. I was the center of it all, the target, the prize, the key. Rael closed his hand, the shard and totem digging into his flesh. You sold your pack, your alpha, your king, for a broken promise and a prize you were never worthy of. He looked at his iron guard. Take him to the dungeons, put him in the cell next to the hunter. They can discuss the terms of their failed bargain. As the guards dragged a now limp Kyle from the room, Lycor bowed his head, his face ashen. My king, I was wrong. I was deceived. My loyalty is to the crown. Your loyalty is to your own ambition, Lycor. Rael cut him off, his voice cold. You will go to your chambers, and you will remain there. If you speak to another council member before I summon you, I will consider it an act of treason. Pray I am in a merciful mood when that day comes.
The elder practically fled from the room. We were alone again, in the ruin of Kayo's ambitions, the truth of poison in the air. Rael came to me, his face a grim landscape of sorrow and fury. He gently took my hand and opened his own, placing the small cursed wolf totem into my palm. It felt cold, imbued with 5 years of my own stolen life. This was done to you, he said, his voice raw, so only you can undo it. I stared at the totem, at the caged effigy of my own soul. How? I had no voice for spells, no knowledge of rites. I was just the girl it had been used to break. As if hearing my silent despair, Rael placed his other hand over mine, sandwiching the totem between our palms. You are not alone, he murmured. He closed his eyes, and I felt him reach for me through the bond, not for solace, but to offer strength. He poured his lone, formidable will, the power of his alpha soul into me. It was not a flood, but a steady, supporting current. Fight, the feeling pulsed from him. To me, your wolf is waiting, calling home. I closed my eyes, focusing on the cold, dead thing in my hand. I thought of the vibrant, wild wolf I vaguely remembered from my youth, a creature of joy and freedom. I called to her, not with a voice, but with the sheer, desperate yearning of my soul. I pictured the silver threads of the cage turning to dust. I pictured the wound on the totem's throat healing. I poured all my grief, all my rage, all my hope into that single focused point. The totem in my hand began to grow warm. A faint golden light pulsed from between her fingers. I felt a tremor deep inside me, a shifting of ancient, dormant power. Something was breaking, something was waking up, and for the first time in 5 years, from the deepest part of my soul, I heard a sound. It was not a thought, not a feeling. It was a clear, strong, and utterly furious howl. The howl was not a sound I made, but a sound I wasn't. It was a shock wave of golden energy that erupted from the space between our hands. A raw, primal declaration of existence that had been silenced for 5 agonizing years. The cursed totem in my palm, the effigy of my caged soul, glowed with an incandescent heat, foreshadowing into 1,000 motes of light and ash.
The silver thread that had formed its cage snapped with a dissonant, ringing chime that echoed in a place beyond hearing. The backlash was instantaneous and excruciating. A lifetime of sensory deprivation vanished in a single blinding flash. Suddenly I could smell everything: the sharp metallic tang of Rael's bloodlust, the sour scent of Kale's lingering fear on the air, the ancient dust in the mortar between the stones, the subtle perfume of dried herbs in Lycor's robes from half a corridor away. The low crackle of the fire in the hearth was a roaring inferno in my ears. The faint vibration of the guard's footsteps down the hall was a series of seismic tremors beneath my feet. And inside my own head, where there had been only the quiet solitude of my own thoughts, there was now a second presence. It was not a voice of words, but a being of pure feeling, of instinct, of fury and boundless joy. Free, mine, free. The sheer, overwhelming force of it all was too much. The world dissolved into a meaningless, painful kaleidoscope of sensation. A scream of pure agony built in my chest, but my throat, still bound by the ghost of the curse, refused to give it voice. My body arched, a bowstring pulled too tight, And then I was falling into a welcome darkness. I woke to stillness, not the empty silence I had always known, but a chosen, peaceful quiet. I was in Rael's bed, tucked beneath the heavy furs, the fire in the hearth now a gentle, crackling whisper. He was sitting in the chair beside the bed, watching me, his formidable frame seeming to fill the room with a protective presence. The storm of his curse was quiet, but more than that, the constant, anxious vigilance of the king had eased. He saw my eyes open, and a profound relief softened the harsh lines of his face. "Melis," he murmured, his voice a low, rough sound that vibrated with a tenderness I was still learning to accept. I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy, bruised from the inside out. My mind, however, was different. The second presence was still there, no longer screaming with the shock of its release, but circling, curious, like a wolf exploring a familiar den after a long absence. Safe, it projected, a feeling of contentment and security that was aimed directly at the king. Mate, ours. I flinched. The possessiveness of the thought was startling, instinctual, and utterly foreign to my own cautious human mind. Rael's brow furrowed in concern. He reached out, his hand hovering, before gently taking mine. "What is it?" he asked. "What do you feel?" How could I explain? I looked at him, trying to convey the impossible with only my eyes. I gestured from my head to him, then made a circling motion with my other hand. A second one. "Here. It knows you." A slow, dawning understanding lit his eyes. Awe. "Your wolf," he breathed. He squeezed my hand, his gaze intense. I felt it, through the bond. When the totem broke, it was like a second sun igniting inside you. I can feel her now. She is watching me through your eyes. It was true. My wolf was peering out at him, not with my fear and uncertainty, but with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. She saw not a cursed king, but her alpha, her partner, the other half of her soul. She felt no shame, no unworthiness. She simply knew, with a certainty as deep as the roots of the mountain, that he belonged to us, and we to him. He is strong, she thought, a feeling of pride and approval washing through me. Good mate. He protects the den. Tears pricked at my eyes. Tears of relief, of grief for the lost years, of terror at this new, divided self. Rael saw them, and his expression softened. He brushed a thumb over my knuckles. "The hunter's words were lies meant to break us," he said, his voice firm as if to banish any lingering doubt. "You are not an empty vessel. You were a locked one. And now you are whole." Whole? I felt fractured, a human mind suddenly forced to share its space with a wild, primal creature. I felt raw, exposed, every nerve ending tingling with a world that was too loud, too bright, too much. I pulled my hand away and curled into myself, overwhelmed. My wolf bristled at the retreat. "No fear, stand. We are strong now." I shook my head, pressing my palms to my eyes to block out the overwhelming sensory input. Rael understood instantly. He stood and moved to the heavy curtains, drawing them across the window, plunging the room into a dim, comforting twilight. He spoke a low word to the guard outside the door, and soon the roaring fire was banked to low, glowing embers. The world softened, its sharp edges blurring. He came back and sat on the edge of the bed, his weight a solid, grounding presence. He didn't touch me. He simply waited. Slowly, the frantic pounding of my heart began to ease. My wolf, sensing my distress, quieted her fierce projections, settling into a low, watchful hum. I lowered my hands. Rael was watching me, his patience a gift. I took a shaky breath and reached for him, not for the anchor's connection, but with a question. I pointed to my throat, a hopeful, desperate look in my eyes. The cursed totem was destroyed. Was I free? Could I speak? His expression tightened with a sorrowful understanding. He shook his head gently. "The shaman who did this. The magic was layered. The totem caged your wolf. But your silence..." He touched his own throat. It seems to be a separate binding, one woven with a different thread. Disappointment, sharp and bitter, lanced through me. My wolf snarled in frustration. Speak, howl, claim him. But there was nothing. The path from my mind to my mouth was still a barren, broken road. The silence remained. Seeing my despair, Rael's jaw hardened with resolve. We will find a way, Melis, he vowed, his voice a low iron promise. This shrouded shaman, this Morwen, he holds the key. The hunter in the dungeon will give him to me, and when I have his name, I will hunt him to the ends of the earth. I will tear the cure from his throat if I have to. His words, meant to comfort, sent a spike of alarm through me. I grabbed his arm, my eyes wide. I projected a feeling through the bond, a wave of caution. Danger, trap. He is clever, my wolf agreed, a low growl rumbling in my mind. Hunt together, protect mate. Rael looked down at my hand on his arm, then back to my face. He saw the new, fierce intelligence in my eyes, the combination of my human caution and my wolf's predatory instinct. He gave a slow, appreciative nod. You are right, this is not a beast to be charged head-on. He stood, his decision made. Rest, recover, let your soul settle. I am going to the dungeons. I will not be gentle, but I will be wise. He started for the door, but I held his gaze, a silent plea. Don't leave me out. I need to know. He stopped, his hand on the iron latch. He closed his eyes for a moment, and I felt him reach for our bond. Not just as an anchor, but as a conduit. I will not be out of your reach, he promised. When I have him, I will open the way. You will see what I see, hear what I hear. The queen will be present for the traitor's confession. With that, he was gone, the heavy door thudding shut behind him, leaving me in the quiet dark. I lay there feeling the strange dual rhythm of my own human heart and the steady, powerful thrum of the wolf that was now a part of me. I was not alone anymore, in any sense of the word. An hour passed. I drifted in a state between sleep and wakefulness, my senses still a raw, open wound. Then I felt it, a deliberate opening, a psychic door swinging wide in my mind. It was Rael. He was keeping his promise. Suddenly, my senses were his. I was standing in the cold, torchlit dark of an interrogation chamber. The air smelled of sweat, fear, and blood. The hunter was chained to the wall, his bravado gone, replaced by a broken, terrified shell of a man. Vorlog stood in the corner, a silent, grim-faced observer. Rael stood before the hunter, his presence utterly dominant. A king who had shed all pretense of mercy. And he calls himself Morwen, the hunter rasped, his voice broken. He promised us gold and the king's head, said the curse had made you weak, addled your mind. A bitter, bloody laugh escaped him. He lied. Morwen, Rael repeated, the name tasting like poison. The name was familiar to him, a ghost from his past. I felt the jolt of his recognition. He was my father's shaman. He was exiled after my father's death, accused of dabbling in forbidden rites. He never left, the hunter choked out. He has lived in the shadows of this mountain for 20 years. Watching you, he said the moon's blessing on your bloodline was a mistake, a power too great for any one wolf to hold. He said it drove your father to an early grave, and that it would destroy you too. He believes it is his sacred duty to purge your line, to correct the goddess's error. A cold dread, Rael's dread, seeped into me. This was not a rival's ambition. This was the work of a zealot. The curse, Rael demanded, his voice dropping. My curse. Was it his work? No, the hunter shook his head frantically, chains rattling. That's the irony, he told us. He said the curse wasn't a curse at all. It was the blessing, awakening in you without a mate to ground it. He said it was an uncontrolled, unbalanced power. He didn't cast it. He just steered it. He nurtured it. He whispered in your father's ear, in the council's ears, that it was a curse from your enemies to hide what he was doing. A look of crazed understanding filled the hunter's eyes. He needed you to be a monster, isolated, alone. He was waiting for you to burn yourself out, to shatter your own kingdom from within. The truth was a stunning, devastating blow. Rael's entire life, his 20 years of torment, had not been a curse from a rival or a cruel twist of fate. It had been a perversion of his own immense power, manipulated by the man his father had trusted. Morwen had not cursed him. He had simply hidden the key, and I was that key. But something changed, Rael pressed, his voice tight. Why move now after 20 years? The hunter's gaze became distant, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The girl, the Omega, he was furious when he learned of her. He came to me in a rage. He screamed that the anchor had been found, that she had been hidden from him. He said she was the one prophesied to balance the Thorn bloodline. Her coming meant his time of waiting was over. He had to act. He had to kill you before you could form a true bond with her, before you became whole. Where is he? Rael's voice was the whisper of an avalanche. He has gone to the heart of the mountain, the hunter gasped, his last reserves of strength failing. To the old ritual grounds. He said he would perform a rite of severing, to use the mountain's own power to poison the bond between you, to turn your anchor into your poison, to make her touch, kill you. The connection snapped shut. I was back in the king's bed, the furs suddenly feeling like a shroud. I was breathing heavily, Rael's cold fury and my own terror, a toxic cocktail in my veins. The door to the chamber burst open. Rael strode in, his face a mask of stone, his gray eyes blazing with a cold, clear purpose that was more terrifying than any cursed rage. He came to the bed, his movements sharp and decisive. He twisted my blessing and he tried to break my mate, he said, the words falling like hammer blows on an anvil. He will not succeed. He reached for me, pulling me from the bed, his hands firm on my shoulders. He looked deep into my eyes. A king speaking to his queen, an alpha speaking to his mate. He has gone to the heart of our power to perform a rite of unmaking, he said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. So we will go too. We will face him on that holy ground, and we will perform a rite of our own. There was no time for counsel, no time for strategy. There was only the cold, burning certainty of the truth. Morwen was not just an enemy of the pack. He was the architect of Rael's entire life of agony, and he was now moving to destroy the one thing that could heal it. He was trying to poison me, to poison us. Rael pulled me to my feet, his hands steady on my arms. The weakness in my limbs was a distant concern. My wolf, now fully awake and seething with a protective fury that was a living fire in my blood, gave me a strength I had never known. She was a coiled spring of muscle and snarls in the back of my mind, ready to be unleashed. Hunt, she growled, a constant low thrum of intent. Find him, end him. Vorlog, Rael commanded, his voice ringing with an absolute authority that left no room for argument. Bar the doors to the mountain passages. No one is to follow us. This is not a battle for warriors. It is a battle for the soul of this pack. Vorlog, who had followed Rael from the dungeons, looked from his king to the dark, gaping maw of the passage that led deeper into the mountain's core. His grizzled face was a mask of concern. My king, you cannot face a blood mage alone. Let me gather the guard. His magic is not aimed at my body, Rael cut him off, his gaze locking with mine. It is aimed at our bond. Only we can face him. He placed a hand over my heart, where the obsidian pendant rested. She is all the guard I need. Vorlog's gaze shifted to me. He saw not the trembling, broken Omega he had once pitied, but something new. He saw the flicker of golden light deep in my eyes, the fierce set of my jaw, the way I stood unflinching beside his king. He saw a queen. He bowed his head, a gesture of complete, unquestioning loyalty. As you command. Rael took my hand, his grip firm, our fingers lacing together. It was not a gesture of support. but of unity, two parts of a whole, preparing for battle. We turned from the torchlit keep and stepped into the living darkness of the mountain. The passage was ancient, not carved by hand, but worn smooth by centuries of pause and the slow, patient breathing of the earth itself. The air changed instantly, the sense of smoke and cooked meat replaced by the cool, clean perfume of deep stone, damp moss, and something else, a faint electric hum like the air after a lightning strike. My newly awakened senses, which had been an agony in the keep, began to recalibrate in this place of power. The overwhelming noise of the world faded, replaced by the mountain's heartbeat, a slow, deep thrum that vibrated up through the soles of my boots and resonated in my bones. My wolf, which had been a frantic cage thing, settled into a state of high predatory alert. This was her territory. This was our power. We walked in silence, our footsteps the only sound. Rael was a pillar of focused intent beside me, but through the bond, I felt the storm raging within him. 20 years of a life he now knew to be a lie. The agony he believed was a curse. The isolation he believed was a necessity. All a careful, cruel manipulation. His rage was a white-hot forge, but it was a controlled burn. He was no longer the mindless beast of the curse. He was a king who had finally been given the name of his true enemy. As we went deeper, the path began to glow with a faint, silvery light. Veins of quartz-like crystal pulsed in the walls, their light waxing and waning in time with the mountain's deep thrum. Whispers seemed to echo from the stone, not words, but feelings. The ghosts of 1,000 generations of alphas who had walked this path. Their strength, their sorrows, their power absorbed into the very rock. Rael's grip tightened on my hand. "My father brought me here once, when I was a boy," he murmured, his voice a low vibration in the humming quiet. "Before the change, he said this was where the first alpha made a pact with the mountain spirit, that our strength doesn't come from the moon alone. It comes from this rock, this earth." He was sharing a memory, a piece of himself he had likely shared with no one. It was an offering, a strengthening of the bond between us before the trial to come. I squeezed his hand in return, sending a wave of unwavering support back to him. "I am with you," my wolf added her own sentiment. A fierce, possessive growl that echoed in my mind. Always. After what felt like an eternity, the narrow passage opened into a cavern so vast it felt as if we had stepped into a subterranean sky. The ceiling was 100 feet above us, lost in darkness, but the cavern was lit by a single, colossal crystal that jutted from the center of the floor like a jagged tooth of the mountain itself. It was easily 30 feet tall, its facets pulsing with a soft, internal silver-blue light. A small, perfectly still pool of water surrounded its base, reflecting the light like a sheet of liquid starlight. This was the heart of the mountain. The air was so charged with power it made my teeth ache, and the fur on my arms stand on end. And he was there. Morwen stood on the far side of the pool, his back to us, one hand resting on the great crystal as if drawing power from it. He was gaunt, dressed in the simple dark robes of an ascetic shaman, his long gray hair tied back from a face that was all sharp angles and pale, stretched skin. He did not seem surprised by our arrival. "So the beast has come, dragging its anchor behind it," he said, his voice a dry, calm rasp that held no fear, only a profound, weary disappointment. He turned slowly, and his eyes, deep set in his skull, burned with the cold, unwavering fire of a true fanatic. This was not a man driven by greed or ambition, but by a conviction so absolute it had hollowed him out. "Morwen," Rael's voice was a low growl of contained thunder. "You twisted my life into a lie." "I tried to contain a blight," Morwen corrected, his voice maddeningly reasonable. "The power in your bloodline is a flaw, Rael. A mistake of the goddess. It is a seed of tyranny, a power too great for any one soul to bear without being consumed. It destroyed your father, turning him from a wise king into a paranoid warlord. I watched it begin to destroy you. You did not watch, Rael snarled, taking a step forward. You guided. You nurtured my pain. You called my blessing a curse and stood by while it tore me apart. A necessary quarantine, Morwen stated, his gaze unwavering. You were a tempest I sought to contain within a bottle, isolated, feared, powerless to act on the world stage. It was a painful solution, but a stable one, and it would have held had she not appeared. His cold, analytical gaze shifted to me. It was like being examined by a mortician. He saw not a woman, not a wolf, but a variable in his grand equation that he had failed to account for. The anchor, he mused, his eyes narrowing as he took in our joined hands. A legend, a failsafe I believed to be a myth, a soul born with a specific resonance and to ground the unstable power of the thorn line. You were hidden, your potential dormant, until the brute Kael's foolish curse inadvertently shattered the cage around your spirit. The irony is exquisite. My wolf lunged against the inside of my mind, a furious snarl of pure hatred. Let me tear his throat out. I held her back, focusing instead on pouring a steady stream of calm, cold resolve into Rael. Do not let him bait you. Do not let him set the terms. You tried to have me caged again, Rael said, his voice dropping, the fury in him being honed to a razor's edge. You used Kael, you sent the spears, you sought to sever a bond blessed by the moon and the mountain themselves. You are the blight, Morwen, a parasite that has fed on the pain of my house for a generation. I am a surgeon, attempting to cut a cancer from the heart of this pack, Morwen countered, raising his hand from the crystal. The air in the cavern grew instantly colder. The soft, pulsing light of the great crystal began to flicker, its rhythm becoming erratic. You see this bond as a blessing. I see it as the final catalyst. Together, your power is not just balanced, it is magnified. You would become a god king, Rael, an immortal tyrant with a world of mortals at your feet. I cannot allow that. The rite of severing is not an act of malice. It is a mercy for you and for the world you would inevitably break. He began to chant, his voice low and guttural, the words in a language so ancient it felt like the grinding of rocks. The air crackled with dark energy. The beautiful, silvery light of the cavern was being corrupted, tinged with a sickly, greasy shadow. A black, oily film spread across the surface of the pool at his feet. He was attacking the heart itself, twisting its sacred energy into a weapon. I felt it first as a pinprick of ice in the center of our bond, a cold alien presence attempting to worm its way between us. I tightened my grip on Rael's hand, focusing my will, my wolf's will, into a shield of golden light around our connection. Rael roared, not with the curse, but with pure alpha power. He drew on the mountain, on me, and pushed back against Morwen's encroaching magic. For a moment, we were at a stalemate, a titanic, invisible struggle of wills in the heart of the cavern. Morwen's lips twisted into a grim smile. You are strong together, I grant you that, but your bond is new, unformed. And her soul still bears the scars of its cage. He looked directly at me, his eyes pinning me with a terrible, knowing coldness. He feels your strength, but can he bear your pain? He changed the incantation. The dark energy stopped pushing against our bond and instead focused entirely on me. It didn't feel like an attack. It felt like an unearthing. The magic delved into me, bypassing my wolf, bypassing my conscious mind, and seized upon the deep, buried trauma of the last 5 years. The shame, the loneliness, the phantom pain of the torn mark, the silent, screaming agony of being a ghost. It ripped all of that pain from the dark corners of my soul and shoved it, raw and unfiltered, down the bond and into Rael. He screamed. It was a sound of pure, soul-shattering agony. He stumbled back, his hand flying from mine, his other hand clutching his head. The silver fire of the curse exploded in his eyes, not controlled, not focused, but wild and untamed, a rampant inferno responding to the sudden, overwhelming psychic wound. Mate is hurt, my wolf shrieked in my mind, a blast of panic and fury. "You see?" Morwen's voice was calm, a lecturer explaining a successful experiment. "She is not your anchor, she is your poison. Her brokenness will always be a weakness, it will forever be the chink in your armor. Her touch will not bring you silence, it will bring you an echo of her own unending suffering." Rael was on one knee, his head bowed, his body shuddering with the effort of fighting a war on two fronts, Morwen's assault and his own curse, which was now raging out of control, feeding on the pain I had inadvertently flooded him with. He was losing. Morwen's right was working. I stood there, frozen in horror. He was right. My pain was hurting him. My broken past was a weapon being used against the man my wolf claimed as a mate. The instinct to retreat, to run, to hide myself away so I could never hurt anyone again was overwhelming. But as I took a step back, my wolf rose up in defiance. "No!" The force of her will was a physical blow. "We do not run. We do not hide. We are not broken. We are the queen of this den. We fight for our mate." Her fury, her absolute certainty burned through my fear. She was right. We were not that broken, silent girl anymore. We were Magelis. We were wolf. We were whole. Morwen raised his hands, preparing the final severing blow. Rael let out a guttural roar of pain, the silver fire beginning to leak from him in crackling arcs of energy. I did not retreat. I advanced. I walked to the edge of the starlit pool, my eyes locked on Rael. I reached down, plunging my hands into the cold, pure water at the very base of the crystal. Ignoring the spreading taint of Morwen's magic, I drew on the mountain's true power, the deep, clean, ancient strength that Morwen had only managed to pollute at the surface. I felt it answer me. A surge of raw, elemental energy flowed up my arms. A power as old as the stone. My wolf rejoiced, howling her triumph in my soul. I straightened up, water sluicing from my hands, my eyes glowing with a faint golden light. I met Morwen's shocked gaze. He had expected me to shatter. He had not expected me to fight back. I walked to Rael's side. He was lost in a storm of pain and cursed fire, barely aware of my presence. He was on the verge of breaking. I knelt before him, my heart aching with his agony. My touch had become his poison, so I would have to give him something more than a touch. I would have to give him everything. I leaned forward and pressed my lips to his. The moment our mouths met, the world exploded. It was not a gentle kiss. It was the collision of a storm and a star, an act of pure, desperate, primal claiming. And from the depths of my being, from a place that had been silent for 5 long years, a single, broken, but undeniable word tore from my throat. Mine. The word was a rock thrown into a silent pool, and the kiss was the ensuing tidal wave. It was not a kiss of tenderness, but of raw, desperate reclamation. It was the striking of a match in a chamber filled with gas, and the resulting explosion was not of fire, but of soul. Golden light, the light of my reawakened wolf, poured from me. Silver fire, the untamed, agonizing power of his blessing, erupted from him. Where our lips met, the two forces collided, not in opposition, but in a cataclysmic, world-altering fusion. Morwen's assault on our bond became irrelevant. There was no bond to attack. For a breathtaking, terrifying moment, we were no longer two separate beings connected by a fragile thread. We became one. His 20 years of torment flooded me. It was a physical agony, the feeling of being burned alive from the inside out, the maddening chorus of whispers from the curse, the bone-deep loneliness of a king isolated on a throne of pain. I did not just witness his suffering, I inhabited it, I bore it. And he, in turn, received all of me. He felt the brutal, tearing agony of Kyle's claws ripping away my mark. He experienced the 5 years of suffocating silence, the slow erosion of self, the crushing weight of being a ghost in my own life. He felt the hollow ache of my caged wolf, the shame, the fear, the desperate, unspoken yearning for a voice, for a touch, for a reason to exist. Our shared pain was a crucible. The impurities of his curse and my trauma were burned away in the inferno of our combined souls, leaving only the pure, unshakable truth of what we were to each other: mate, balance, beginning and end. The silver fire that had been consuming Rael did not vanish. It changed. The chaotic, agonizing energy solidified, purified, coalescing into something new. The raging, uncontrolled wildfire became the focused, brilliant, white-hot light of a star. He rose to his feet, pulling me up with him, our lips never parting. The shuddering in his body ceased, replaced by a profound, unshakable stillness. The power that had been his lifelong torment now settled into him. A perfect, seamless fit, as if a missing piece of his soul had finally been forged and set in place. We broke the kiss, and the single entity we had become resolved back into two, but we were irrevocably changed. We stood hand in hand, facing Morwen, a united front. Rael's eyes were no longer burning with the curse's madness. They shone with a clear, steady silver light, like twin moons in a calm night sky. He was no longer a cursed king. He was the king he was always meant to be. Morwen stared at us, his gaunt face a mask of disbelief and horror. The foundation of his entire existence, his fanatical belief that Rael's power was a blight, had crumbled to dust before his eyes. He saw not a monster being tamed, but a god being crowned. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling with the first true fear he had likely ever known. "Impossible. The broken cannot mend the broken. It is a law of nature." "You know nothing of nature," Rael said, and his voice was new. The rough guttural edge was gone, replaced by a smooth, resonant power that echoed the thrum of the mountain itself. It was the voice of a king in absolute command of himself and his domain. "You see only flaws to be cut away. You cannot comprehend a power that is meant to be shared, to be balanced." "I will not allow it," Morwen shrieked, his composure finally shattering. He threw his hands toward the great crystal, drawing on all the dark, twisted energy he had summoned. "I will shatter the heart itself before I allow this abomination to be fully born." A wave of black, corrosive magic, thick and oily as tar, surged from him towards the crystal. But before it could strike, I acted. My fear was gone, burned away in the crucible of our joining. All that remained was my wolf's fierce protective certainty and a deep instinctual connection to the cavern, to the heart of the mountain. This was my place of power as much as it was his. I was the anchor. I held things steady. I raised my free hand, palm out, towards the approaching wave of darkness. I did not create a shield. I did not summon a weapon. I simply denied it. I became a conduit for the mountain's true, pure nature. The cavern was a sacred place, and I was its keeper. My will, fused with the mountain's own, became an immutable law. "You do not belong here." The wave of dark magic hit an invisible wall a foot from my palm. It didn't explode. It simply ceased to be, its foul energy unmade, dissolving into harmless mist under the pure, silver-blue light of the heart. Morwen cried out as if he'd been struck, stumbling back, his hands smoking with the backlash of his own failed magic. Rael squeezed my hand, a surge of fierce pride and love flowing through our now perfect bond. He looked down at me, and his silver eyes held a universe of gratitude. Then he turned his gaze back to the cowering shaman. "This is my kingdom, Morwen," Rael said, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of an avalanche. "This is my mountain, and this," he lifted our joined hands, "is my queen." He took a step forward, and the very stone beneath his feet seemed to hum in answer to him. "You have lived your life in the shadows, a parasite feeding on fear and lies. So let me show you the truth you have always denied. Let me show you the power you called a curse." He raised his free hand. The air around it did not crackle with energy. It simply warped. The silver light of the cavern bent towards his palm, coalescing into a sphere of pure, silent, compressed power. It held the beauty of a newborn star and the terrible final promise of a supernova. Morwen, his face a ruin of terror and failed faith, tried to scuttle away. "No, please. You called my blessing a blight," Rael said, his voice dropping to a whisper that filled the entire cavern. "You were wrong." He opened his hand. There was no explosion, no sound, only light. A wave of pure, silver, cleansing light pulsed outward from him. It was not a destructive force, but a restorative one. As it washed over the cavern, the last vestiges of Morwen's dark magic were erased. The oily film on the pool vanished, leaving the water impossibly clear. The flickering of the great crystal steadied into a strong, serene, unwavering pulse. And when the light touched Morwen, he simply came undone. The hatred, the fanaticism, the 20 years of lies and manipulation that had formed the core of his being, it all dissolved. There was a brief silent scream of a soul being unwritten, and then there was nothing, not even ash. He was simply gone, erased by the very light he had sworn to destroy. The cavern was silent. The only sound was the gentle, rhythmic hum of the heart of the mountain, now steady and peaceful. The battle was over. Rael let out a long, shuddering breath. The sphere of light in his hand fading away. The immense power he had just wielded settled back into him. No longer a raging tempest, but a calm, deep ocean. He was whole. He turned to me, and the look in his silver eyes held a reverence that stole my breath. He reached up, his hand trembling slightly, and gently touched my lips. "Your voice," he whispered, his own voice thick with an emotion so profound it was painful. "I heard your voice." My throat felt raw, scraped, the muscles clumsy from years of disuse. But the path was clear. The cage was broken. I looked up at him, at this magnificent, beautiful king who was my other half, and I felt a shy, miraculous smile touch my own lips for the first time in years. I took a breath. It was a struggle, a rusty gate being forced open, but the word came. "Rael," I whispered, my own name spoken aloud. It was a stranger's voice, hoarse and quiet, but it was mine. Tears welled in his shining eyes. He let out a choked laugh, a sound of pure, incredulous joy. He wrapped his arms around me, lifting me from the floor and crushing me to him in an embrace that was both infinitely powerful and impossibly gentle. He buried his face in my hair, his shoulders shaking. "Melis," he murmured against my skin, saying my name as if it were a prayer he had only just learned. I wrapped my arms around his neck, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning universe. My wolf was a purr of contentment in my soul. My human heart was a frantic drum of impossible happiness. We were not healed. We were remade. After a long moment, he set me down, though he kept his hands on my waist, unwilling to break the contact. He looked around the serene, glowing cavern. "The right of soul and starlight," he said, a note of awe in his voice. "The legend said it was a myth, a joining of the Thorn Alpha and his anchor in the heart of the mountain to forge a bond that could not be broken. Morwen didn't come here to perform a rite of severing. He came here to stop this." He looked down at me, his silver eyes serious. "What we did here, it has changed more than just us, Melis. It has reawakened the heart of this pack. It has settled the mountain. It has forged a new path for our people." I simply nodded, my throat still too tight for more words. It was enough. He smiled, a true, brilliant smile that transformed his harsh, scarred face into something breathtakingly handsome. He leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my lips. It held none of the desperate fury of the first, only the quiet, profound certainty of a promise. A beginning. "Come," he said, taking my hand. "Let's go home, my queen." We walked out of the cavern hand in hand, leaving the darkness and the ghosts of the past behind us. The passage back was no longer a place of whispers and shadows. It was bright, the crystals in the walls glowing with a warm, welcoming light, illuminating our path back into the world. A world that would now have to reckon with a king who was no longer cursed, and a queen who had finally found her voice. Emerging from the mountain passage was like being born into a new world. The air of the Iron Keep, once familiar, now felt thin and flat compared to the charged, living atmosphere of the heart. My senses, recalibrated in that sacred place, were now a symphony instead of a cacophony. I could hear the individual heartbeats of the guards down the hall, distinguish the scent of Vorlog's loyalty from the bitter tang of Elder Lycor's fear, and feel the subtle shift in the keep's emotional climate, as if it were a change in the wind. The pack knew. They did not know what had happened, not the specifics of Morwen or the truth of the curse, but they felt the change. A deep seismic shift had occurred in the bedrock of their world. The oppressive, ever-present dread that had hung over the keep for 2 decades, the fear of their king's next storm, was gone. It had been replaced by a powerful, humming serenity that flowed from Rael like warmth from a hearth. He walked beside me, his hand in mine, and he was a different man. The tension that had perpetually lined his brow was gone. The harsh, rigid set of his shoulders had eased. He moved with a fluid, confident grace, no longer a man at war with himself. The silver light in his eyes was a calm, steady beacon. He was not just a king who ruled. He was a king who reigned. As we entered the main corridors, the first shifters we encountered stopped dead, their jaws slackening. They stared at Rael, at the profound peace that now radiated from him, and then their gazes fell to me, walking beside him, not as a shadow or a tool, but as an equal. And they heard it, the soft scuff of my boots, the whisper of my breath, and the impossible, miraculous sound of my voice as I murmured his name. Word spread through the keep, faster than fire through dry grass. The curse is broken. The silent queen speaks. By the time we reached the great hall, it was filled. The entire pack was there, from the lowest Omega to the highest-ranking warlord, their faces a mixture of awe, disbelief, and burgeoning hope. At the head of the crowd stood Vorlog, his good arm held across his chest in a gesture of fealty. Beside him were the council elders. Gressa's face was unreadable, but Lycor looked as though he had seen a god walk out of the mountain, and he was terrified that he had bet against him. And near the front, held between 2 massive iron guards, was Kael. His face was a ruin of bruises and despair. He looked up as we entered, and when he saw us, when he saw the calm power in Rael, and heard the murmur of my voice, as I spoke a quiet word to him, something inside Kael finally, irrevocably broke. The last ember of his arrogant defiance was extinguished, leaving only the cold gray ash of his utter ruin. He had cursed a queen and betrayed a god. There was no coming back from that. Rael led me not to the dais, not to the iron throne that had been his prison, but to the center of the hall. He stood before his people, a king remade, and he did not release my hand. For 20 years, he began, and his new voice, clear and resonant, filled the hall, commanding absolute silence. This pack has lived in the shadow of my pain. You have called it a curse, a blight upon our bloodline. His silver gaze swept over them all, holding them captive. You were deceived. A collective gasp went through the hall. The power in my blood is not a curse, Rael declared, his voice ringing with the truth we had discovered in the mountain's heart. It is a blessing from the moon and the mountain, a power of creation and protection. But it is a power that was meant to be shared, to be balanced. His gaze softened as it fell upon me. Without its other half, it was a storm without a center, a fire without a hearth. I was incomplete. He turned to the pack again. There was one who knew this truth. Morwen, shaman to my father, who allowed you to believe a lie. He did not curse me. He merely hid the key. He nurtured my pain, hoping I would consume myself and this pack. In the fire of my own unbalanced power, he used traitors and assassins to further his goal. His gaze fell on Kael, and the temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees. He sought to destroy the very soul who could make me whole, to sever a bond he did not have the power to unmake. He lifted our joined hands. He failed. In the heart of the mountain, the bond was not severed. It was forged. The blessing has found its balance. The storm has found its anchor. The king has found his queen. The silence that followed was a breath held by 1,000 lungs. It was a moment of profound world-altering change. And then, it was Vorlog who broke it. With a raw, emotional cry, the old wolf dropped to one knee. "My king, my queen," he roared, his voice thick with a lifetime of loyalty finally rewarded. His cry was the breaking of a dam. A wave of sound and emotion crashed through the hall as one by one, then in dozens, then in hundreds, the entire pack knelt. Warriors, elders, servants, omegas, they all knelt before their king reborn, and the silent queen who now had a voice. It was not a gesture of fear, as it had so often been. It was a spontaneous, overwhelming outpouring of joy, of relief, of hope. I looked out at the sea of bowed heads, my hand tight in Rael's, and for the first time, I did not feel like an outsider. I did not feel like a fraud. My wolf purred in my soul, a feeling of deep, abiding contentment washing over me. Home, pack, ours. I looked at Rael, and he was not looking at his pack. He was looking at me, his silver eyes shining with a love so fierce and profound, it made my heart ache. In that moment, surrounded by his adoring people, he saw only me. "It seems my proclamation was a bit premature," he murmured, a smile touching his lips. "They have crowned you themselves." "They have welcomed their king home," I whispered back, my new voice still a marvel to me. He raised our hands higher. "Rise," he commanded, and the pack rose as one. "Tonight we do not mourn the past. We celebrate the future, a future of strength, of unity, a future under the balanced light of your alpha and his queen." A deafening roar of approval shook the rafters of the great hall. Rael then turned to the guards holding Kael. His expression became hard, the benevolent king replaced by the dispenser of justice. "Kael of the house of Darren," Rael's voice was cold and formal, stripping Kael of any personal connection. "You have been found guilty of high treason. You conspired with an enemy of the pack to harm your alpha. You trafficked in forbidden magic to harm a member of your own pack." He paused, letting the weight of the crime settle. "By law, the only sentence is death." Kael crumpled, a low sound of despair escaping his lips. Elder Lycor, standing nearby, winced as if he had been struck. He had allied himself with a dead man. But then Rael looked at me. He was giving me a choice. This was Kael's final crime, but I was his first victim. His fate was tied to my past. He was offering me the right to determine the sentence. The entire hall fell silent, all eyes turning to me. It was my first test as their queen. Would I be a queen of vengeance or of mercy? I looked at Kael, at the pathetic broken man kneeling on the floor. I saw the ghost of the boy I had once thought I would spend my life with. I felt the echoes of his cruelty, the 5 years of silence he had inflicted upon me. My wolf snarled in my mind, a vicious predatory sound. Let me tear his throat out, let me taste his blood, justice. But I was not just a wolf. I looked past Kael to the rest of the pack. I saw the Omegas, the ones who had lived in fear, and I saw the hope in their eyes. I saw the warriors who craved strength, and I saw the respect in theirs. Vengeance would satisfy my wolf's bloodlust, but it would build nothing. I met Rahel's gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head. He understood instantly. He turned back to Kael. "However," he continued, his voice ringing through the silent hall, "your crimes were committed against your queen before she was your queen. And she has a different view on justice." He gestured for the guards to force Kael to his feet. "You will not be granted the clean death of a warrior. Your name will be struck from the pack records. Your lands and titles are forfeit. You will be stripped of your rank and your pride." He looked at me, A silent question. I gave a slight nod, knowing what came next. "You cursed Malus to a life without a wolf," Rael pronounced, his voice like the tolling of a great bell. "So you shall live the same. A shaman will perform the rite of severing upon you. You will be cast out, wolfless, into the lands of men. You will live out your days as a broken thing, forever denied the call of the moon, forever an exile from the people you betrayed. That is the Queen's justice." It was a fate worse than death. To a shifter, to lose one's wolf was to lose one's soul. A gasp of shock and awe went through the crowd. It was a terrible sentence, yet it was perfectly, poetically just. Kael stared at me, his eyes wide with horror. He had tried to cage my soul, and now he would lose his own. As the guards dragged him away to his fate, Rael turned to Elder Lycor. The wiry old wolf was trembling. "My lord Lycor," Rael said, his voice dangerously smooth. "You allied yourself with a traitor. Your judgment has proven flawed." "My king, Lycor began, his voice cracking. "You will step down from the council," Rael commanded. "You will cede your seat to my beta Vorlog, whose loyalty has never wavered. You will retire to your lands and reflect on the wisdom of choosing your allies more carefully." It was a public disgrace, but it was not exile. It was a merciful end to his political career. Lycor bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. "Thank you, my king. Thank you." With the traitors dealt with, a palpable sense of relief and celebration filled the hall. The dark clouds had finally parted. Later that night, long after the impromptu celebration had begun, Rael led me away from the noise and the crowds. He took me not to his chambers, but up a winding staircase to the highest battlements of the keep. The rain had stopped, and a full, brilliant moon hung in the clear night sky, bathing the mountains and the forest in a breathtaking silver light. We stood in silence for a long time, the cool night air on our faces, the sounds of the celebration a distant, happy murmur below. "It's over," I said, my voice quiet in the vastness of the night. It felt strange to speak so freely, to hear my own thoughts given sound. "It's just beginning," he corrected, turning to face me. He took my hands in his silver eyes glowing with a soft lunar light. "We have a pact to lead, a kingdom to rebuild, alliances to forge, a future to create." He drew me closer, his hands sliding up to cup my face. "But tonight," he murmured, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper, "none of that matters. Tonight, there is no king, no queen, no pack." He leaned down, his forehead resting against mine. "There is only Rael and Melis." His wolf was a warm, possessive presence in my soul, calling to mine. And my wolf, finally, completely free, answered with a joy so pure it was a physical sensation, a warmth that spread from my chest through my entire body. He kissed me then, under the light of the full moon. It was a kiss of promises kept and futures yet to be written. It was the sealing of a bond, not of magic or destiny, but of two souls who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. It was not an ending. It was the first true howl of a new song, and I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in the heart of the mountain, that it was a song we would sing together for the rest of our lives. 1 year later, the air in the great hall tasted of sunlight and peace. The heavy rains of the past seemed a distant memory, replaced by a golden autumn light that streamed through the high-arched windows, illuminating the intricate weave of a new tapestry. It hung where the frayed one of the first alpha had been, and it depicted not a battle, but a king with silver eyes and a queen with a voice, their hands clasped as they stood before the heart of the mountain. The pack was gathered, but their shoulders were relaxed, their eyes bright with contentment. They were listening to their queen. My voice, once a rusted, broken thing, was now clear and steady. It was not loud, but it carried, imbued with the quiet authority I had grown into. I was recounting a trade agreement with the southern packs, a matter once left to the warlords and the council, but now Rael and I handled such things together. He sat on the great iron throne, not as a prisoner, but as a relaxed and attentive partner, the steady silver light in his eyes fixed on me with an unwavering pride that was still my favorite thing in the world. "Their Alpha sends his regards," I concluded, addressing the assembled pack members. "And he accepts our offer. The winter stores will be full for all of us." A murmur of approval went through the hall. Vorlog, now the grizzled and respected head of the council, stood and bowed his head. "The Queen's wisdom serves the pack well." I smiled, a genuine, easy expression that was no longer a stranger to my face. "The King's wisdom saw the value in the alliance," I corrected gently. I was merely the one who spoke the words. Rael's answering smile was a private, intimate thing, a silent conversation that passed between us on the current of our bond. "We are one wisdom," the feeling flowed from him to me, one heart. The pack had thrived in the past year. With the fear of the curse lifted, a new era of prosperity had begun. The paranoia and suspicion that had festered under Morwen's long shadow had been replaced by a fierce, unified loyalty. The Iron Keep was no longer a fortress of dread, but a bastion of strength, its people secure in the knowledge that they were led by a balanced, whole, and deeply devoted pair. My visions had not stopped, but they were no longer violent, terrifying premonitions. They were gentler now. Whispers from the mountain, small glimpses of a flooding river that allowed us to move the herds to high ground, or a border dispute that could be settled with words before it came to blows. My gift, once a symptom of my trauma, had become a tool of my queenship, a way to protect the people I had come to love. After the morning's court was dismissed, Rael came down from the dais, his hand finding mine as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We walked out of the hall and into the sun-drenched courtyard, the place where he had once executed a hunter and proclaimed me his. "I remember when the silence in this yard was one of fear," he said, his voice a low, contented rumble beside me. He looked at a group of young shifters sparring, their happy shouts echoing off the stones. "I prefer this kind of noise." "And I remember when any noise at all was a torment," I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. We stood for a moment, simply watching our people, our pack, living their lives in the sunlight. The ghosts of the past were still there, but they no longer had power. Kael was a whispered cautionary tale told to arrogant young pups, a wolfless exile lost to the world of men. Lycor was a recluse on his lands, his ambition a poison that had consumed only himself. And Morwen was nothing, an echo of a lie that had finally been silenced by the truth. "Come with me," Rael murmured, tugging my hand. He led me away from the courtyard, up the winding stairs to the battlements, to our place, the place where the moon had blessed our new beginning. From this high vantage point, the entire kingdom spread out before us. The dark, ancient sweep of the forests, the jagged peaks of the surrounding mountains, the silver ribbon of the river that marked our southern border. It was a vast, wild, and beautiful land. It was our home. "A year ago," Rael said, turning to me, his hands finding my waist and drawing me close, "I stood here and felt the weight of all this. A crown I never wanted, a power I couldn't control, a loneliness so profound I thought it would shatter me." He looked down at me, his silver eyes brilliant with love. Now I look at it and all I feel is gratitude, because this kingdom, this life, it led me to you. I reached up, my fingers tracing the faint silvery scar on his jaw, a mirror of the one on my own neck. They were no longer marks of pain, but reminders of the journey that had forged us. "And my Qualence," I whispered, my voice still holding a trace of wonder, "led me to hear the truth of your soul." My wolf, a constant, warm presence within me, purred in agreement. She was no longer a separate, shouting entity, but an integrated part of my being, her instincts woven together with my human heart. And she loved the strong, calm, devoted wolf who was her mate with a fierceness that was the bedrock of my own love. Rael's expression softened, his gaze dropping slightly. He placed one large, warm hand gently on my stomach, over the soft wool of my gown. His touch was reverent. Through the bond, I felt his senses extend, feeling what I felt, the steady, strong beat of my heart, and beneath it, the faint fluttering, impossibly fast rhythm of another, a new life, a new legacy. "The blessing is strong in this one," he murmured, a note of profound awe in his voice. He could already feel it, the spark of the Thorn bloodline. But this time, it was not a solitary, raging fire. It was a calm, steady flame, nurtured from its very first moment by the balanced, unified power of its parents. "She will not know the silence," I said, my hand covering his. "And you will not know the storm." "No," he agreed, his silver eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "Our child will know only the strength of a complete bond, the love of a true pack, the peace that we have built together." He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that held all the promise of our future. It was a kiss of sunlight and mountain air, of shared souls and a love that had been tested in the darkest of fires and emerged unbreakable. When he pulled away, he rested his forehead against mine, our breaths mingling in the crisp autumn air. Below us, the Iron Keep was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, a beacon of hope and strength. Our home, our future. "I was a king in a cage of his own skin," he whispered, his words an echo of a past that felt a lifetime away, screaming for release. "And I was a ghost," I answered, my voice full of a love that had filled all my empty spaces, haunting the edges of a life that was not my own. He smiled, a smile that held all of our tomorrows. And now, I looked out at our kingdom, at the mountains that held our history, and the forests that held our future, my hand held fast in his, our child a tiny sleeping promise between us. I felt the deep, steady hum of the mountain, the joyous thrum of the pack, the perfect silent song of our bonded souls. I was not an anchor, I was not a queen, I was not a ghost, I was home. "Now," I said, my voice ringing with a certainty that was as deep and unshakable as the mountain beneath our feet, "we are free."